Hi guys, so I am going to show you guys how to draw a realistic eye. So the first thing that we're going to do here, I have a piece of Bristol board here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to quickly sketch this in. I'm just going to freehand it. Eyes are not particularly hard to freehand. The big thing is just go light so that you can make the adjustments that you need to make. Okay, I'm going to put in some of the details here so that I can make sure that I'm kind of keeping my bearings and I know where I am within the eye. Okay, come back in with an eraser, just kind of clean up my lines so I know which ones are the ones I actually want to use. Okay, so we have the basic outline. We're going to do a little bit of the shadowing up here of the lid. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to get the pupil in as well. That right in the middle here. Actually, I don't like the way that that looks, so we're going to take that out. All right, try again. So that's a big part of this is, I'm self-taught, and what I would say is just keep going until you figure it out. It doesn't always have to be right the first time. In fact, most of the time it's not. Okay, so then on the picture that I'm using, there's a blocking right here where there's a big highlight. So I'm gonna I like to put those in so I know where I am again in the picture, and so I can kind of leave that part out. Okay, so that's the basic drawing in, right? It's not, again, not super complicated. Okay, so now we're going to start by doing some basic shading. So we're just gonna go around the eye here, around the outside of the iris, and firm up what we have drawn in. Okay, so now I'm going to start with the pupil. This is a 4B. For that first part, I was using a 2H for this one. All right, so testing my skills at being able to draw a reasonable circle. Okay, all right, gonna color it in. And in fact, I'm gonna switch to something darker and softer because I'm too impatient. Okay, so here we go. This is a 10B. Okay, there you got that. And then we're gonna go around the outside of the iris with this. This is the 4B again. The outside of the iris is always darker. But if you look closely at it, what you'll see is that it's darker, but we often draw it as like a really stark line, and often it's pretty soft, because remember, this whole thing inside of our eyelid is what's holding in an eyeball, and the eyeball is huge. The eyeballs are big. If you've never seen one and you can stomach it, check it out. They're big. Okay, so what we see is just like a small fraction of what is actually behind this. So that's a big piece when you're drawing. You want to remember that, because often people will just draw this and it ends up looking really flat and not like it's part of a bigger sphere that's behind this. Okay, so all right, reasonably happy with that. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna do some of the basic shading. So I'm gonna come back in with a 2H, and I'm gonna just get some graphite down here. You don't need to be, if you're working on Bristol board, you don't need to be worried too much about this, about like the direction. You're just, eventually you will need to. But for right now, this is all gonna get blended out. And it's really about just getting this down. Don't push down with your pencil. We want all of these lines to disappear. And if you push down, you won't be able to make them disappear. So real light, just starting to get some shading in. Okay, now we're gonna come back in with a stump, and I don't want that one, this one. Okay, so I have a lot of graphite on the end of this. If you don't have one that has a lot of graphite, that's fine too. I'm just gonna start to work this into the paper, and you can see all the lines. And this is why I always say make sure to get Bristol board if you're doing this kind of drawing, because when you have Bristol board, you can just buff this right out and you won't see any of those lines. If you're using like sketch paper, it'll look kind of splotchy, and you will see the lines. You won't be able to make them go away. It has too much tooth to it, the paper. And again, if you don't know what that means, tooth is just what they call the texture of the paper. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come around the edge. So this eye is actually quite light. So I'm gonna just come around the edge of this pupil here and just little circles. This is just gonna soften the edge. Okay, and then I'm gonna use, this is a B. I'm just gonna start to do some shading around the edges here. Remember, the whole effort here is to make a sphere inside of a casing, basically. So we're just building this up. Okay, same thing again. Grab your stump. Blend all this out. Okay, there's the beginning of that shading. Now I'm going to do the same things in some of these other areas. Okay, so back here, this is also going to, this part here, remember, it's round. So this is the edge of what is this piece here. It's also going to hold the eye in. So we're going to make sure that all of this looks like the eyeball is going to be fading out that way. Okay, so blend this out. When you're blending, at this point, your line direction doesn't matter too much, but when you're blending, blend like it's round, right? You want to like move. When you think about something that's spherical, you know, if you were to be holding it in your hands, you would be running your hands around it like this. That's how your lines, when you're drawing, that's how your lines, pretend sort of like you're sculpting it. It will help a lot in building something that feels like it's got dimension to it. Okay, so and over here, the side of the eye is a little bit lighter, but remember, things are rarely, when we think something is light on an eye or anything on a drawing, it's hardly ever white and it's hardly ever black. Sometimes it is, but very rarely. Usually it's some shade of gray. Okay, I'm just coming back in and sort of reinforcing this darker line here. This is a 4B. Okay, so there's your basic shading. Nothing fancy, right? Like this is all very doable. Any of you can do this, right? And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start adding in, this is your basic layers, right? Your basic tones. I could do more, I could keep pushing this. You can, I mean, you know, you can always push pictures, almost always you can keep going. Adding more depth. Okay, so I kept going. Okay, so again, I can keep going and I might come back and revisit some of that, but we're gonna go with the eyeball part of it first. I don't want to leave you guys with a million-hour video here. So Okay. All right, so we're going to go and begin to do some of the shading within the iris here. Now is when direction becomes somewhat important. So if you've never looked carefully at an eye, you should. Before you draw it, go look in the mirror and really look at what your eye looks like. They're intricate, they're interesting, they're kind of crazy looking. But it's going to help you learn not just the anatomy of the eye, but also just what you're looking at and what you're drawing. Okay, and now we're going to take our stump and follow the same direction that you were just drawing those in and blend it out. Okay, so that's your first layer. And remember, all hyperrealistic drawing is about layers. You got to do your tonal work first, then you can come back in and start to do some of the detail, and then you do the fine detail. So it's a process, right? You can't come in here, and if you come in and draw this from the beginning without the tones behind it, it's not going to work well for you. Okay, so now we're just gonna do the next layer, right? We're gonna keep building this. So along here, again, I'm using a 4B here. I'm not pushing down really hard. I'm just letting the weight of the pencil do the work for me. That's about it. That's about it. Blend it out again. I'm not like blending. I'm just softening it here. You want to still be able to see some of these lines, right? Like these lines are important. Okay, and then I'm going to go a little darker still along the edge of this side of the iris. And then I'm going to come through and do some push down a little bit and do some lines. Okay, blend these out again. Not all the way. Okay, so this eye is actually pretty light, but noticing that I made this side a little too whooped out there, so that's fine. If you screw it up, just make your pupil a little wider and balance it out. It's really not that big a deal. Sometimes it's hard to see all of what you need to see until you get it in, and that's all right. It's always fine to mess up and then do it again. You can always fix it. All right, that's a little bit better. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so remember the pupil is like a hole, right? So when you look at the eye, it's like this part in here is going to be going into the center there, like almost like a little black hole. So that's what we want to make here. Make it look like it's going in. So almost like a sun. You're just going to kind of come around. Do that. And then again, come back through. And lightly blend this out. Okay, so now's the fun part, I think, which is adding some highlights to this part here. Okay, so we're going to take our eraser. I just have a pencil style eraser here. And I'm going to sharpen it up a little bit. And then we're going to start to add some of this in. And again, direction here is important. I like using a pencil style eraser here because you can adjust your pressure, and also you can just sort of draw with it like it's a regular pencil, just adding in white lines because you're just subtracting graphite from the page. So you can make some lines that are really light, and then you can kind of come in hard and make sections that are a lot brighter. And really, you're just trying to create like a bit of a donut around the outside here in the middle. Right? Because around the outside of the iris is usually dark. And then around the pupil, you want to make it look like it's going in. So remember that dark pushes things away and light brings things towards us. So this is the peak of the eye. And that want that to fall back, we need to leave that darker. Okay, so now you can come back through, and I'm just using a tortillon here, but just soften some of the edges of this. And then what you can do is you can use like something like this is a B. That should work fine, something in that range. And you can just kind of come back and you can start to add in some of these little details. So maybe some of these darker strands that kind of come up a little bit. Okay, and again, come back in with this. And we're not like fully blending these out. You want to leave the highlights that are sort of adjacent to these lines, but just softening them really. So just kind of going over them really light. And okay, so then the other thing we can do is use an electric eraser, which I think is always good for eyes. So I'm just gonna, I have an electric eraser here. I'm just gonna sharpen this up a little bit. So the nice thing about, this is a new nib on here. So the nice thing about these is that you can make a really fine point, and then you can just come back in and draw with it. So we're just going to so again, we're just making another layer. Lots and lots of layers. And with these, don't push down. If you push down, it will get really swirly, and you don't want that. So just, you know, it spins, let it do the work. If you're patient with it and you just let it ride on the top, it will take whatever you've got on here, it'll take it right down to the paper. So there's some finesse and some practice that I do think comes with using an electric eraser. Practice it, you know, it does get easier to control, and it does get easier to be able to find that sort of finesse where you can go really light and tiny and skinny, and then you can also sort of put a little pressure and make lines that are not as sketchy, that have more solid like edges to them. Okay, so I'm just softening all this a tiny bit, not blending it in. I'm just relaxing those edges. Okay, so you can see it's just starting to take some shape, right? Okay. Now we're gonna come back over to the edges here. And I'm gonna add in some better shading here. So like a 2H probably. Okay, we're gonna blend that in. Remember, the center of the eye is going to be the highest point on the eye. So you want to make sure that the edges of this are going to be darker, because remember, dark things push back, lighter things come forward. So it's not going to be white. You know, again, things are most of the time are not actually white, but it is going to be lighter as you get closer to the iris. All right, so a little bit darker. I know I jump around a little bit. You'd have to just try and keep up with me on this part because this is just how my brain works. I see things and I'm like, oh, that needs to be darker. And so sometimes when you're doing stuff like this, you know, you'll put a section in and you're like, oh, now this tone is this color or this shade. And then, oh, I need to make this darker. So for me, it's a constant reassessment, and it just causes me to jump around a little bit sometimes. So sorry. Okay, so on this side over here, we'll do a little bit of the same. But this side, the light on this picture is coming this way. So we have this really strong highlight over here. Okay, blend that in. Okay, and over here, we're gonna blend this in. Okay, So again, got all the shading in, right? And got the water line down here. Sometimes I use these. If you've got one that has a lot of graphite on it, they can be really great. Just to, if you don't have one of these, you can take like a 2H and just draw this in. But if you have one, use it. And something up here. If you don't have a stump, just get a 2H and draw it in. And then I'm going to also come back through and whoa. Steady hands are always good for drawing. But you don't always have them. Sometimes you just go way out. It's fine. Again, this is why we like good paper. Nobody has to know. All right. Just soften that a little bit. You can also come back through and really lightly over this line. And then come back through with your stump. Okay, so I'm gonna use a kneaded eraser. I don't use these for a ton, but this is actually really great use for them. They pull the first like layer of graphite off. So I want to round out this edge a little bit here. It's gonna look way too bright. That's okay. And then over on this side, actually, I'm gonna fill this in first. But over here, there's a lot of highlights. So we're just gonna add some of these in real quick. Make sure your direction is right here. Okay, and then obviously we don't want like a stark line like that, so we're just gonna come back in with the blending stump and just right along the line of it, little round circles. Kind of dips into this graphite and pulls it into this lighter space and softens that line. Okay. Okay, so next we are going to, I'm going to address this bottom part of this lid here. So again, this is just an eraser. A lot of this is going to be hidden underneath the eyelashes, but just want to get a little bit sharper line in there. Okay, so now we're going to come back into the corner of the eye here and draw in some of the detail work. This is like a 4H. It's not very dark at all. And that's fine. I just want to be able to slowly bring these tones up a little bit more, develop this a little bit more. And this is what's going to really start to set this back and make it look like it is a sphere inside of a socket. Okay, and lightly blend this in. Okay, same thing over here. Got a much darker line along the water line over here. Okay, blend that in. If it's streaky when you're done, it's okay, just keep blending. It will even out. Okay, and then I'm looking at this, and the other place that there's a really good shadow is right up here. So we're going to put that in. Right, we have this really strong highlight here. Remember, when you do any highlights, they're going to follow the curvature of the eye. If you make them straight and they're not following the curvature of the eye, it's going to look super weird, and it's not going to be believable, which, if this is the kind of drawing you're doing, you want it to be believable. So make sure that you follow that curvature. Important. Just adding in some of the shading that's along this, the top of this iris and underneath the lid here. This is almost always going to be in shadow unless the light is coming from underneath somebody. Okay, we're going to blend this out a little bit. Remember, whenever you blend something in, it's always it takes a little bit off of the paper, right? So some of it ends up on here. So if you start with something that's really dark and you want it really dark, you might have to go back in and redo it, because the stump, when you use the stump, it's going to pull it off. So there's something really, really black like that is going to end up being kind of more gray. Okay, so you just might need to do more layers, but just know that that's something that happens. And that you might need to revisit your work over and over again for a bit until you get it built up enough that it's actually the tone that you want. Or where you can just be smooth enough with your pencil strokes that you don't need to blend it in like that. Okay, and now I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the eye that I'm drawing, the picture, the photo, and it's just a lot lighter. So I'm just going to come through with this. Again, this is really good at just taking the top layer of graphite off. So just once it gets graphite-y, just fold it back under and go again. This is going to leave all that texture we've worked really hard to create with all those layers, and it's just going to make the whole thing a little bit brighter. And then there's also a very sharp, actually, I'll use the electric eraser for this. There's a sharp highlight also right here that I didn't see before. Again, make sure your curvature lines match well. Okay, and then make sure your eraser doesn't get too short. You want to be able to sharpen it properly. Okay, and then I'm just going to come back through it and just do a couple of extra brighter lines as I lighten the whole thing up. Make sure you stay with the direction of the lines along here. And then you can soften those again just a little bit. Just kind of the edges of them, like the ends. You want to leave the whitest part in the middle there. Okay. And then just gonna work it a little bit more until I'm really happy with it. And this is the part where, you really have to look at your own picture and see what you see. Trust your eyes to be like, oh, that section looks a little dark. That section looks a little too light. Great, fix it. It's the same techniques. Really, all that I'm here to do is to give you the techniques, and then you can take this and you can apply it to anything. So I know it seems scary to go and find an eye. Like this one clearly is a very light eye. This is probably blue or green, right? But then to find a brown eye and to take these same skills, you can take that and apply that there. And I know it seems intimidating, but you just have to trust that if you practice these skills enough, the skill set, you can use this on all of it. Okay, so let's see. I'm just gonna draw this lash line in here. And then shade along that lash line up to it. I like to do a little bit of cross-hatching almost. I think it just puts down a really consistent amount of graphite. So when you blend it in, it looks pretty consistent. So we can come back in and just working up to this little water line here, blend that in. Okay, and now you can take the kneaded eraser again and just lightly go along this water line here. Make it not quite as stark. I want a little bit of highlight on here, but we don't want it white, right? And then along this top part of this top lid here, there's a very strong highlight coming down here. But remember, we want everything to turn away from us. So everything is round. So we're gonna shadow a little bit along here. That's gonna make this whole thing look round, like eyelid. Okay. I'm going to darken this a little bit more. It's not dark enough. This is a 4B. I'm going real light here. Okay, blend that in. Blend that out again. Make sure you're picking the right stump. And for anybody who doesn't know this, if you have a stump that has a lot of graphite on it and you don't want all of that, you can take some sandpaper and just, as you're doing, just sort of spin it. And you just want like a gentle, firm pressure. And that will clean it off. So when you go into areas like this that are really, that you want to stay light, you're not going in with, you know, something like this, which is going to deposit a lot of graphite on there. Okay. Okay, so now we've got there's a little bit of water that collects at the bottom of the eye here. So we're going to draw that in. And there's a little bit up here. And then there's going to be a section above this that's just a little lighter. And a tiny bit right here that's a little lighter. Again, this is where you just look at your picture. There's going to be spots like this on whatever picture you decide to use as well. Okay, you can see it starts to really kind of come to life at this point. A little bit more out here. And then we're going to do a couple of dots of light that are this is where an electric eraser is really great, because it is takes it right down to the paper, so it's quite bright. All right, and then we're going to do the last bit here, which is some eyelashes. Okay, so for eyelashes, you want to start, they sort of taper in a little bit, and then they come harder, and then sort of a flick of the wrist. They take some practice. I feel like I'm still learning how to do eyelashes well, but I've gotten better at them. Remember, when you're looking at this part, they're going to be down, right? And you want to make sure that you don't do them all in the same direction, because eyelashes go in all kinds of directions. And then also we're going to have the shadows of them in this highlight. So I turn my pencil almost every time I draw one. It keeps I think a mechanical pencil works the best for this. That keeps the tip of it really sharp. And then you can also take a stump and just in here, you're not blending, you're just darkening along where the root is. And that can make them look full, like we want them to look. In this picture, the eyelashes in the center here are weirdly out of focus. So I'm just gonna get some graphite down here. Again, you want lots of different directions. And we're just I'm gonna blur these out a little bit. Also remember the eyelashes. If you haven't looked in the mirror also, look in the mirror at your eyelashes. They're in lots of rows, right? They're not just like one straight line. So when I see pictures that people draw and they just have like one line of lashes, it doesn't really actually look like that. And so when you are trying to make it look realistic, make sure you're checking your reference and your face and your eyes and your skin and everything that you're drawing. You've got your own best reference for information by looking in the mirror. Okay, and then the bottom down here, we have the same thing. All right, so guys, that's the gist of it. Practice, watch this back on repeat a million times and slow it down so that you can really see what I'm doing. Obviously there's like always little bits you can continue moving out from here and make this, into a face. But that's the general gist of how you draw an eye. And I hope this was helpful. If there are other things you'd like me to do tutorials on, please let me know. But yeah, I hope that this was good for you guys. All right, keep drawing, keep practicing. That's how you get good. See you guys next time.